Thank you for joining us here at lunch hour on a wonderful Tuesday, Rhode Island Startup Week 2022. My name is Annette Tonti, and I'm the Managing Director of RIHub. We're Rhode Island's innovation hub, and for anybody starting a high potential growth business, we're the first stop. We can help you with everything from business planning to mentoring to introducing you to investors, etc. So very glad to see you all here. I see some folks in the audience who've been working on cannabis for years. We're really thrilled that we're at a point in Rhode Island where we're actually going to be moving forward. And so exciting to introduce to you today the leader of our panel, Ray Jorgensen, who's a nationally prominent speaker. He's an advisor and healthcare reimbursement expert. And basically, Ray has had a huge career in healthcare and reimbursement. He's now the CEO of Core Compliance. Core Compliance is modernizing retail cannabis. Pretty exciting company that Ray's actually running. You're going to hear more about that today, but he's leading the panel. They are, just to give them a little bit about Core Compliance, they're creating a Starbucks-like app and with Venmo-like payment options for cannabis. And the focus is on the client engagement versus just the payments. So you guys have a great panel. We hope this can be interactive at some point. Take it away, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, very much. And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I have a really wonderful crowd here of folks. And what I'm most excited about is to have them talk more about kind of what they're doing in the space and what's happened. Rhode Island has historically, and this group would demonstrate some real national prominence. From a very tiny little state, we've done some really interesting things. So without further ado, I'm just going to kind of walk around from my left to right on my window here. And Andrea, if you don't mind, if you want to give a quick background of kind of your entrepreneurial background and always how did you get into cannabis? I think each of you kind of a little bit where you're from, how you got here, and then we'll kind of move on and get into the questions. So Andrew, please jump in.
I'm a Rhode Island resident. I have lived in Rhode Island most of my adult life, with the exception of 10 years. I was born in Providence, went to Moses Brown up in Providence, went to the University of New Hampshire, etc. Worked in Wall Street for a little bit, ran a family office for a little bit. And about 6 or 7 years ago, because I'm kind of a consumer products person, got into the cannabis space. We originally started out in Colorado, where myself and a couple of partners of mine, contributed about $2 million to the company to seed it. We ran into some difficulties back in 2015, 2016. And we said, okay, we can fold our tent, or maybe we'll continue to move forward. And what's the next step? The next step involved, what state are we going to select to go into? We selected Nevada. Where we bought some existing operations, doing about $200,000 or $300,000 a month. Fast forward from January of 2018 to where we are now, we do about $2.5 million a month and climbing. So we've about 8 or 9x'd the business in about a 6 or 7 year period of time. Nevada is a very interesting market. One of the reasons why we went to Nevada was because we thought that there'd be a branding opportunity. And there's 40 million people, 45 million people a year that come into Las Vegas. And we thought, geez, if you're going to build a brand in an environment where you can't bring things across state line, how do you bring customers to you? Well, Nevada, Las Vegas in particular, has a lot of people from a lot of different jurisdictions that come to Las Vegas, Nevada, whatever, for a variety of different reasons. And cannabis is just another offering in the state. So we have, as we embarked on that, we put up another $8 million. So we have $10 million invested into this. I only say this because we are investors, we are operators, and in the last 5 or 6 years, we have gleaned infinite amount of experience, run into a number of experiences that have kind of shaped us to date. So we own and operate, again, really 3 assets in Nevada. We operate on reservation tribal land up in northern Nevada, where we harvest about 20 to 30,000 pounds annually of flower trim in biomass. And then we also operate a retail store off the strip in Las Vegas, where we see about 1,200 people a day. It's a high volume store that spend roughly about $50 after tax per person. And again, Nevada is very different, but it will be similar here in Rhode Island as time goes on. And then we also run a manufacturing lab, which is a 22,500 square foot facility up in Northern Nevada, where we process tinctures, concentrates, vapes, and we have the #1 brand in the state of Nevada by unit, by revenue in Nevada. So, we sell into about 70 to 80% of the Nevada market, which includes independents and which includes very large MSOs. So I think I have a pretty good background in cannabis. The last 6 or 7 years, I've certainly was 7 feet tall when I started this. I'm now 5'11". So hopefully in the next few years, I won't be 4'11". But this is a very difficult business. And I would say that there are very few or any at this particular point in time that are making money. And until such time as we get some help from places like Washington, D.C., where you can outline rules and regulations, it will continue to be very, very difficult. But I'm going to keep this positive. It's a great industry. It's great growth. It's got great potential. And that's all I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And appreciate that, and emphasizing again that Rhode Islander went far from Rhode Island to make this work for him, and it's awesome stuff. Let me jump over to my right, Mikhail. If you might tell about TSR Grow and kind of where you came from, that'd be great.
Ray, thank you for having me on the panel, and thank you all for making me be a part of this, and appreciate the introduction. TSR Grow, or I myself have been. I haven't been in Rhode Island I've been in Rhode Island for quite some time now, and believe it or not, we started the company about 14 years ago to get into LED lighting and advanced solutions in this space. And really, our goal is to bring advanced really monitoring, lighting, and integrated solutions that are really at the forefront to enable this industry to develop, not only this industry, but horticulture industry in general, to develop itself and move forward in a way that allows it to grow the consistent quality at the lowest cost, and which is one of the challenges in this space. Cost, operations, regulations, good manufacturing practices, unknown regulations, 280E, all of these things bring so much uncertainty. And we've had this vision of over the last 7 years, when we got into the horticulture side of things, of really looking at the forefront of trying to develop advanced solutions that really enable and think ahead to kind of, I don't want to say future proof, but really enable long-term sustainability in thinking about how horticulture and cultivation and managing those operations and looking at the costs and looking at the solutions and trying to really make it so that you can optimize what you do and in a high quality way. And we've been doing that now for many years, and are doing that across the country and working with small, large, mid-level cultivation and customers. And we're excited to be here in Rhode Island and hoping to work with Rhode Island. We've seen Rhode Island go through a lot of roller coasters in this space, and we're hopeful that Rhode Island may be leveling off and really starting to have things on track to get things going. So we're excited and glad to be here and talking with you and the panel and during this week, and excited to be a part and share our whatever information we can. So thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. Appreciate it. And the national perspective is important. We'll come back to that in a little bit, you and Andrew in particular. Jacob, I'm going to ask you to jump in real quick, kind of where you came from, how you got here, and hear a little about Easy Hire.
Cool. Thanks, Ray. And thanks again for having me on the panel as well. I'm Jacob Carlson, the CEO and co-founder of Easy Hire Cannabis. We go by the idea of being the Indeed for weed. So our software platform, I've been in the cannabis industry for about 5 years now, really started in temp staffing. and then got into some direct placement. And then we started working on more of a technology solution. And then I was doing a lot of this while I was at a software company called HubSpot. I just left HubSpot about 6 months ago once we've kind of developed our own proprietary piece of software. And that's why we're going by this idea of being the Indeed for weed. We help a lot of businesses find candidates that fit in those entry level to mid-level roles. And then we help people who are looking for jobs in the cannabis industry be able to create profiles, create a little video introduction of themselves, upload their resume, and then be able to be kind of searched and sorted by particular hiring managers. And up to, I think we're into 7 or 8 states now, Rhode Island included. But yeah, excited to talk more about hiring, software inside of the cannabis industry and kind of how those two relate. And let me know if you have any questions. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it. Matt, I think you're probably one of the most well-known on the panel here. So a little bit of background for those who might not be familiar with you and kind of how you got where you are.
Sure. Afternoon, folks, and thanks again, as everybody else said, for the invitation to participate in the panel. Very excited to be here. My name is Matt Santacroce. I'm the Interim Deputy Director of the Department of Business Regulation here in the state of Rhode Island. In that role, a big part of my job is overseeing the Office of Cannabis Regulation, which, as folks might know, is the unit of state government charged with overseeing the medical marijuana, industrial hemp programs that currently exist. And we're also leading the transition into this new era of adult use recreational production and sales in Rhode Island as well, which has been certainly a long awaited development and one that we're very excited to be a part of implementing. My just sort of general background, I've been in and around state government in Rhode Island for about 7 years at this point, in a variety of different roles. I started in 2015 out of graduate school at the Executive Office of Commerce under the former Secretary of Commerce, Stephen Pryor. I then held a few different roles in former Governor Gina Raimondo's office, most notably as her policy director for almost 3 years. And then I helped to launch the Policy Lab at Brown University, 2019, 2020, 2021, which is a sort of think tank style unit at the university focused on applied social science and data science in the public policy space here in Rhode Island. And then I moved back into government in January of 2021 to head up the Office of Cannabis Regulation. And here we are today. So very excited to be here. Sure, there's a lot of questions about what's going on and have to be a part of this conversation.
Thanks, Matt, very much. So being sensitive to time, we've got about 45 minutes here on the clock, and I've got 4 questions I'm going to pose to the panel. Some may be more relevant to others than not, but I'd like each of you, if you want to, give you a chance to chime in. So the first one that we wanted to ask about was kind of the business model that is pretty common, or has been pretty common, I should say, in this space. Those around and have heard the phrase a single integrated vertical, which typically involves what most people call seed to sale, which literally is the grow. And folks outside of cannabis say, do you mean farming? I'm like, okay, maybe, but we're going to call it the grow side of it, of kind of growing the product. The next is going to be the product creation. And the third is going to be retail sales. And, what's interesting about that is some other states that have been in this for a longer period of time, a state like California in particular, they're actually moving out or recommending folks move away from the integrated vertical. And I'll throw in the chat here just a little article that talked about that in a second while folks are answering questions. But what could Rhode Island do to optimize the cannabis business opportunity while mitigating oversight? And what I mean by that is, when I look at when we think of something like the DBR, it certainly makes sense to me that they're overseeing retail sales, but might it make sense that DEM, environmental management, oversee the grow or the farming side, and then the production side, maybe by Department of Health? Similar to someone overseeing a pharma type agency, because certainly cannabis from a medical side, where we are right now, that we want to make sure there's from an efficacy standpoint that the products are developed in the desired outcomes, so to speak, and the various chemical compositions and whatnot are going to be consistent over time. So again, the question: what could Rhode Island do to optimize cannabis business opportunity while mitigating oversight by agencies not well suited for the prescribed purpose? And Andrew, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you very much. So the first thing that I would implore upon the state of Rhode Island is to go and see what Nevada does. Nevada has something called the Cannabis Compliance Bureau Board. It is a terrible, terrible regulatory situation. And you have revolt that is taking place in the state of Nevada over this. The CCB was the legislature in Nevada. It's a little different than it is in Rhode Island. They only meet once every 2 years. They put in place the CCB. The CCB has no oversight. They're a government agency and they have no oversight. So what they do is, it is a very difficult relationship between the industry and between the regulators. The regulators have no knowledge whatsoever of cannabis. The objective and the goal of the CCB is to fine and to generate revenue. It's a money grab. And so it is hurting the industry. It is accelerating the black market. And certainly in Rhode Island, we have a very substantial black market like we do in every other state. So I would implore the state, no matter who the license winners are or who the operators are, it would be really great if the state of Rhode Island had folks that could sit and talk and discuss. And if there are issues, that the issues are raised jointly, no pun intended, and that the issues are resolved together. And I think that's meaningful. As an example, in Nevada, and I only bring up Nevada because it's starting to happen in other states as well. In Nevada, they charge us time and effort to come and inspect without our notice of whatever. We face tens of thousands of dollars of extra legal bills, and we face tens of thousands of dollars of ridiculous fines and penalties. It doesn't have to be that way. It should be a very good, cohesive working relationship, because what the state needs to keep in mind, and I hope that they do, and I'm confident that they will. And listen, I live in Rhode Island, I love the state, and I'm not going anywhere. So I really do, want to see this succeed. But cannabis should not be looked at as a money grab by the state. You're going to collect your 7% sales tax. I think you have a 10% excise tax, whatever it is. These operators, like myself, we're all facing a 20%, I'm going to call it state tax, and we're facing 280E, which essentially brings the tax rate to 70 or 80% for any business, whether it's social equity or whether it's somebody with very deep pockets. Unless you sell the asset for hundreds of millions of dollars, and those days are over for the time being. People are not going to pay 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times revenue for businesses. But unless you have a level of cooperation between government and between industry, the black market will continue to excel and continue to grow. The final thing that I would say is, I hope that Rhode Island institutes a real meaningful testing platform that's clear and concise, and that the labs are in place to be able to do the necessary testing. I would also hope that the state of Rhode Island, when they look at these things, would look at things that are in Nevada, as an example. We have to test 5-pound batches. It is incredibly expensive. It's incredibly cumbersome. I would hope that the state of Rhode Island would utilize what's done in California and other jurisdictions, where you would only test 15-pound lots. The outcomes are going to be the same, but the burden on the cultivator is going to be lessened dramatically.
Sure.
The final thing that I would say is, I hope that Rhode Island has a framework set up that allows brands to come into the marketplace, because the system in Rhode Island to date is really very vertical. You have 3 outlets. The products that are in the stores, they're okay, but just go over the state line to Massachusetts and look at all the Rhode Island license plates in there. Part of that has to do with rec, of course, but also part of it has to do with price, and part of it has to do with the amount of products and brands that are in the marketplace. So I don't want to dominate this, but that's all I have to say at the moment.
No, I knew you'd have plenty to say. That's why we started. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to go in a little different order. Jacob, anything to comment in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I think Andrew makes a lot of good points from the hiring perspective. I think less legislation around people being able to be badged, obviously being trained internally. I think one of the things that I would say I've seen work better is having the actual institutions and businesses themselves own that badging and training process. Just something we've seen work better because they're more held accountable for it versus the actual individual. So having that be run by basically the business itself is probably something that I would see as part of legislation that has worked in some states and hasn't worked when we're talking about kind of additional committees and things like that. But that's probably the most I would have to add from that perspective.
Okay, and we're going to end up with Matt. So Mikhail, another comment from your perspective.
I think Rhode Island had at one point, was very early on and a leader in this in the cannabis space and the medical program and and the caregiver model, and at some point took a left turn. And I think has a real opportunity, hopefully, to potentially do what other states aren't doing, and really, as part of the things Andrew talked about is encouraging a real business community model where you're encouraging the black market to come mainstream and not making it really onerous for everyone to join the marketplace and to join this space. Don't look at this as an opportunity to take early money out. Look at it as a long-term play where you're trying to encourage the whole market to come in and participate and buy at stores and make it as available as possible so that you are, it's easier than going to the black market. And that's one of the challenges I think with a lot of states is, with all the taxes and the regulations and the fees and everything else, it just makes it almost impossible to go this way. And so I couldn't agree more that, this is really a streamlined operation is important, and, just get this process going. I mean, even just a week ago, they're going to delay putting in place some of the people to oversight and, delay even more rec openings and things like that. So, the government and the senators and everybody involved should let if it's going to be the DBR, let them streamline it and really make it accessible to businesses to operate and be a leader in the space.
So Matt, obviously I know you're not a legislator, so you're kind of carrying out duties, so to speak. I heard you speak on the panel, I think it was 2 weeks ago at the Crown Plaza, and you did pretty much looked at our elected officials to say, here's what we're doing. But what would you see happening, and what have you seen happen that in this regard that's been positive, productive, and what do you think's happening as we move forward?
Yeah, sure. So a lot to unpack in what's been said, and many very good points made. So I think here's what I'll start with, and here's how I kind of think about our role as the regulators here. Like, we're not in Rhode Island or in the United States in the same place in this general industry space that we were 3, 5, 10 years ago. This is a much more mature, established, and quite frankly, familiar industry to not only policymakers, but the general public than it has been certainly in past years. And as a result, I think that sort of like regulatory approaches that really emphasize punitive enforcement, investigation of rule breakers, and a real sense of suspicion on the industry is not really appropriate. Maybe it wasn't ever, but it's certainly not the way I approach this job. And I understand very clearly that we have an industry here in this state that has a lot of really hardworking people who are very passionate about their craft in it, and we ought to partner with them in ensuring that there is ample opportunities for education on the rules and the regulations, that the rules and the regulations are aligned with and reflective of just the practical realities on the ground today. That non-compliance is really approached first and foremost as an opportunity for education and mutual resolution, than it is an opportunity for, we're going to come down on you with a $200,000 fine and put your name in the newspaper. Because more often than not, these things are in the neighborhood of accidental or not willful, and that we have individuals in this industry and business owners in this industry who have put a lot of money into these businesses, particularly on the cultivation side and production side in the state, have been at the mercy of a retail side monopoly for many years, and in many cases have incurred significant year-on-year operating losses in order to keep their licenses valid and intact. And so when I think about kind of where this is all going, I'm kind of hopeful and happy about a couple of things. One is, when we turn retail sales on December 1st or close to December 1st in Rhode Island, which is going to happen, we're going to have definitely 6 and potentially 7 places to buy marijuana in Rhode Island at retail, which is twice as many as there were at the beginning of this year, more than twice as many than there were at the beginning of this year. We have licensed 3 new compassion centers. We're about to license our 3rd new compassion center in October. We've already licensed 2 new ones, so we're up to 5 now. Number 7 is probably going to come online in early December. And so, we've got more retail diversity in the marketplace than we've ever had in this state. And that's a very, very good thing, not only for the producers, that's a good thing for the customer. And that's kind of what we're caring about. Ultimately, it's important that the retailers are doing with the same thing that the production side is doing right now, which is competing on price, quality, and the retail experience. And then moving forward into 2023, folks are right to point out that, the Cannabis Control Commission is yet to be stood up. That, frankly, is something that is way above kind of DBR's pay grade. That's an exercise that's living in the realm of political actors at this point. And so we continue to monitor that situation closely. But we got our eye squarely on the ball. When the Cannabis Control Commission does sort of come into place, the legislation provides for us really interesting opportunity to create all kinds of new license types to provide different access points into the industry and different sort of brand opportunities for businesses. Things like standalone production or edible licenses, things like standalone manufacturing licenses, delivery licenses, that sort of thing, which will not only, foster a more equitable and inclusive cannabis industry, because those are lower capital intensive licenses to pursue. It'll also, kind of create the proliferation of different and smaller brand specific business opportunities like you see in Massachusetts with, many, many more producers of either, cartridges or sort of high value add edible products, that sort of thing. And that's where Rhode Island ought to head. That's where every state is headed. That's more mature and longer away than we are. And, as the kind of commission gets to the work in 2023 and 2024, making those new licenses available, I think that we'll see that sort of market evolution happen here in Rhode Island as well. So I don't know if that's helpful, big speech, and I'm sorry about that.
No, it is. No, it's all good. And listen, you're literally inside the ropes about what's going on, so that's helpful. So a related question to that. So what I heard you say there about if someone were to get a license, one of the questions in the chat here was, is there a date for applications going out specifically around retail license? What I'm hearing you say is a couple of things. I would like you to answer that. But secondly, how about a piece of like you said, someone could just get a license just to create product, or just to get you can get a limited license, is what I'm hearing you say. I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth, but you don't necessarily have to do a full integrated vertical to be allowed to be involved in this business as early as 2023. Is that a true statement?
So I'll take the first thing first. So just to be very, very clear, the retail stores that will exist for adult use purchases on December 1st are those that are currently or soon to be licensed in the medical program. So all the existing medical compassion centers will be eligible to also sell to an adult use non-medical customer on December 1st, but we're not talking about new retail establishments in Rhode Island apart from the currently allotted number of medical marijuana compassion centers. That's going to come next year after the commission does their full rules and regulations, makes an application available according to guidelines that they're going to promulgate. And that's where the additional 24 stores authorized by the legislation will come from.
And those would all be recreational.
And those will all be recreational, and they will all be retail only. Okay. And then secondly, to the second part, and relatedly, is that the commission will also have the opportunity as part of that rulemaking process to set out a process and make available additional different license types. We call these like ancillary licenses, and on our side, things that are like not production, like seed to wholesale and not retail, but like maybe doing like one specific part of a product development and then passing it along like to a retailer as part of the kind of supply chain on the production side, which is a really exciting opportunity for Rhode Island. I will just say, we've got at this point, 10 or 12 years worth of data in Rhode Island. Vertical integration has not been like great for Rhode Island's market. It's kind of the opposite situation that we've got in really any other state, where we have 3 vertically integrated retailers, or until this year, 3 vertically integrated retailers and 65 licensed cultivators. That's an unhealthy situation. And we're continuing to kind of try and unwind that baseline state and create a little bit more of a level playing field where people can compete both at wholesale and retail for, like I said, on all kind of sides of the retail and production experience.
No, that's super helpful. And I'm going to start with you on this next one. So lack of interstate commerce has got tremendous price variation. I mean, and we've seen those prices go up and down all over the place. And I'm going to get Andrew go second, because I know that he's seen the prices move out west between Colorado and Nevada, and certainly in the other Western markets. And legitimate concern about the legacy or the black market, or the very gray market of that product that's just being offloaded, so to speak, without following the legalized industry. But when looking at the notion of it's so expensive to legally produce because of some of the 280E and the town, the city, state, different fees and regulatory. What can we do to do better at this than other states? What have you seen from talking to other cannabis commissions around the country, and what's kind of the general plan? Because as we, at the end of the day, it's never the money, but it's always the money, right? I mean, if someone's gonna, I think I've met a number of people that have said, look, I want to know that I'm buying a product that is well controlled and that I know exactly what I'm getting. But on the other hand, I've only got so much money to spend. So they're certainly they're back against the wall, so to speak, just from an economic standpoint. So if you could respond first, and Andrew, I'll go to you next, if that's all right.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, 280E is kind of the elephant in the room of all this. If the Rhode Island General Assembly could wave a magic wand and allow the cost of goods sold to be deducted for state and federal tax purposes, I would imagine they'd be more than happy to do that. Unfortunately, since this is like a matter of federal fiscal policy and the tax code itself, it's sort of out of our hands, and that feels like a cop out. But setting that aside for a second, I think what I focus on and what our team focuses on is making sure that our regulations, as I said a couple minutes ago, are to the extent that it makes sense, aligned with certainly our neighboring states, and to a large extent the states elsewhere in the country that might not be in our region. Rhode Island is a member of the Cannabis Regulators Association, which at this point includes 40 or so medical and recreational states. And the regulators themselves, my counterparts across the country, all meet on a biweekly basis to discuss any number of sort of tricky and interrelated parts of our mutual jobs. So making sure that the regulations are sort of harmonized with other states is one piece of it. But maybe at least an equally important piece of it is making sure that our regulations are like in tune with what's happening on the ground here in Rhode Island, and are not, reflective of maybe a reality that may have existed 5 years ago and doesn't anymore. And here's like a good example of that. We have had for a long time in our state very, very, very strict disclosure requirements in terms of ownership interests and key managerial control, which is to say, when you are going to apply as a condition of your licensure as a cultivator or a compassion center in Rhode Island, you need to disclose down to like the cent every single individual who has an ownership interest in your business, be it $1 million or like 90% or 1/10 of 1%. And additionally, all those individuals are required to have a key staff and an owner badge, have a federal background check. There's just like a lot of paperwork that comes along with that. And so what we've started to do, and what we did sort of last year as a first crack at this, is to realize that like the ownership structures in the cannabis business in Rhode Island and in every state look very different in 2022 than they did in 2017 when the first version of these rules were promulgated. We ought to have an avenue, for instance, to have publicly traded companies come into our market. That's a really good thing for Rhode Island's market. These are highly professional, highly competent, compliance-oriented businesses who are really doing things the right way, and indeed have like a shareholder interest to maintain compliance, to avoid enforcement, to profit maximize, and to deliver high quality patient experiences. And so when they were saying to us, you know, we don't know how to deal with this like ownership disclosure requirement. Our owners are, first of all, there are like 100,000 of them because we're a publicly traded company. Number one. Number two, they change by the second on, in this case, a Canadian stock exchange. And we said, okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Turns out other states, basically no other state had this requirement in place for publicly traded companies. We went out and we promulgated a new public regulation that amended our existing regulations to open a path, not only for this company, because we didn't want to do like a special deal for just one company, but they had highlighted for us like an important defect in our regulations and one that we thought we ought to address in order to ensure that our market would be competitive going forward and have this same on-ramp going forward. And so we basically went out and created this new regulatory pathway for publicly traded companies to comply with our disclosure interests in a way that made sense for them and also accomplish the same public policy goal that we had set out in the first place. So that's like an example of kind of how we think about this stuff. And when we try to the extent that we can be to just be like very nimble and responsive to these things as they come to our attention.
No, I appreciate that. And Andrew, again, looking at that, quite expensive for us. How can Rhode Island do a better job of trying to keep that cost down? If we can just target the response to that just for sake of time, what do you think?
Rhode Island implementing a wholesale marijuana tax?
Period.
That's a question for the gentleman.
Oh, is it? Are we implementing one?
Is it initiating a wholesale marijuana tax?
Do you know that, Matt?
So the answer to that is no. We've got in the Adult Use Act a sort of three-part tax structure. One is the 7% sales tax. The other is a 10% marijuana excise tax that functions as a sales tax. It's the percentage of the retail value of the transaction. And then a 3% local marijuana excise tax that'll also function effectively as a sales tax that will
It looks like Matt's frozen up there a second. Andrew, can you respond to that after that?
Yeah, so we have limited time. There's so much that I could say. As far as the
There's always a limited
the
time,
approach,
right?
as far as the approach of allowing publicly traded companies in, we're a little publicly traded company, and I would be happy to sit down with the gentleman and explain to him why I don't think that's a great idea to open the doors or open the floodgates, because you'll find out that Rhode Island will shortly become Trulieve, which Trulieve dominates about 60 to 70% of the Florida market. It would take one or two players to dominate the market, and I don't think that's healthy. That's just my opinion. The other thing, so no WMT, that's great. That's a huge deal. I also think that right now the Rhode Island market is incredibly unhealthy, and it's actually incredibly unfair to all those people that particularly were in the grow operation or in the manufacturing. Manufacturing is tough. To manufacture a good tincture, concentrate, edible, to get some really good distillate, you have to use some processes that need to be, unfortunately or fortunately, highly regulated, and it's very expensive unless you're going to do all solventless. And the market is, and I'm getting into the weeds here. Solventless is not a very big marketplace. I think there was a question that came through from a gentleman or a lady, I don't know, regarding branding and how you quote unquote get part of these deals. And from where I sit, again, with a very unhealthy market right now, with three retailers that have an oligopoly on the state, I think that if the state really wants to have a robust marketplace, it has to come up with a plan that allows people, whether it's micro grows, so those are people that are small batch manufacturers. I think that in a state like Rhode Island, I think plant limits are something that should be really considered, because I could come into Rhode Island tomorrow and I could drive the price down to $700 or $800 a pound based upon what we know and how, how we know how to grow and how other big operators. So if you bring in the MSOs, what you may find is, or if you encourage the MSOs, and I'm not saying to discourage, but if you encourage them, at the end of the day, you're going to find the market will be unhealthy. So, and as far as profits go, with the way that the industry stands right now, it is incredibly difficult with the tax structure and the regulatory schemes that the states have put in front of us. Very, very difficult to make money. There are very few, if any, companies that I'm aware of that are actually making money. So I'm glad to hear that Rhode Island doesn't have a wholesale marijuana tax. I also hope that Rhode Island really takes into account things like green packaging, the amount of waste and the amount of plastic. I mean, this is a plant that comes from the ground. We live in a state that has the greatest asset in the world. It's called the ocean. We should be doing everything that we can in order to promote this as a green business. If you were to come to Nevada, or I'll point to 7 or 8 other states with the Mylar bags and the excessive wrapping and the childproof this. And then lastly, I would say, I hope that Rhode Island institutes something along the lines of a fair and equitable advertising program. People need to be able to reach out and to be able to tell people and to show people the products that they have. And there's many means by which you can do that are completely legal. The final thing that I would hope Rhode Island did, it's final, and I could talk forever on this, and I apologize to everybody.
Don't apologize, it's useful. Appreciate it.
The final thing is that I really hope that Rhode Island comes up with a bona fide, and I said this before, but really comes up with a bona fide testing scheme. Testing is key, because at the end of the day, so I have a 21-year-old and a 24-year-old. I'm 59 years old. I've been using cannabis since I was 16 or 17 years old. What I was smoking when I was 16 or 17 years old could have been hemp, ragweed. It could have, who the heck knows what it is. Now we can fast forward and we're in this regulated market, which is the greatest thing in the world. Because if you're a consumer of tobacco, if you're a consumer of alcohol, if you're a consumer of cannabis, whatever you're consuming, it's nice to know that it comes in a package that's clearly labeled and that you know what it is and the desired outcome is what you're going to get. So I hope again
and
that
it's
Rhode
repeatable,
Island
right?
has, what's that?
It's repeatable, meaning you're going to get the same efficacy from the same product.
That 100% correct. And then you as a consumer, you get to determine what brand that you want to buy. And here's the analogy, or here's the example. I shop at Target. At the end of the day, if Target only had Target toothpaste or Target soap, I wouldn't go back. I like Crest. I like my floss. I like my toothbrushes. I like my this. I like, whatever it is that I like, Target gives that to me. In Rhode Island, because of the way that the system is set up right now, and because there's no economical way, the economics are so bad. There's no reason, and I couldn't encourage anybody in today's day and age, in today's environment, to get into the business. And now if you're going to open the door to MSOs, to some of these large players, you're going to run into the same situation that is happening in other states. In Nevada, which is much larger territory, much larger state than the state of Rhode Island, we essentially now have 6 or 7 companies that control 80% of all of the revenue in the state. You could have 1 or 2 companies in Rhode Island control 70 to 80%. You won't have good variety. You're not going to have good product, et cetera. Now I'm going to go on mute.
Right. No,
I couldn't agree
that.
more. I couldn't agree more with that, Andrew. I mean, opening the doors to MSOs like Matt talked about is almost like having the 3 you have now and maligning all the other cultivators. I mean, you need to make this a small business. You need to tax it at a rate that's going to encourage the black market to come to the stores and allow people to come and open shop. And that's how Rhode Island is going to take, that's how Rhode Island's going to get ahead. We're always second, we're always last to the game. I mean, you got Connecticut, Massachusetts, everyone around us opening up. It's kind of like having the whole casino mess and, last minute we're going to open a casino and everybody's going to come. no, make it be different, stand out and
Right.
do things the right way. And that's how
Yeah,
the
I did
that's
some
how
good
Rhode Island's
historical
going to
stuff.
stand.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Jacob, any comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think so we work with 7 of the top 20 cannabis companies in the country. So we have seen kind of what working and operating with them is like. And I would think it's unfair to make the assumption that because a company is bigger and is more experienced, that they're necessarily going to operate better, especially inside of a particular state like Rhode Island. To give you an example, I work with, again, one of the top 5 cannabis companies in the country, right? And the closest person I work with them for their shops in Massachusetts, the closest person I talk to is somebody in Chicago, right? So when I'm trying to explain to them what East Boston is, right, and how that isn't really that close to Fenway, right, sort of thing, they have a hard time making those sorts of connections. So that's just a small example of how, like, basic information of how the state runs and how the state operates, right? There's things that you have advantages of being from the state, understanding how the state operates as well, versus some of the MSOs. The second point of why the MSOs would be scary for me for Rhode Island, newsflash, you're not going to be one of their highest priorities, right? The state is just not big enough for them to actually have resources to actually put into the state. They're looking at Texas, they're down in Florida, they're all over the place as far as Rhode Island goes. The last thing that they're worried about is somewhere like Rhode Island, no offense, right? Will they put a couple stores in there and try to get some revenue out of it, similar to how they're doing it in Massachusetts? Absolutely. But eventually they're going to move out of Massachusetts because they're not making enough money out of Massachusetts. They're going to go to another state that they can get more money out of. So I would caution the relationships with inside of the MSOs. And again, I hope none of my MSO customers are here listening today because, they help pay the bills for us as well. But just be cautious
Sure.
of that as the state just coming online.
No, I appreciate that. And there was a couple of comments in here talking about, hey, can you run a profitable cannabis business right now? And I'm more just looking for a yes, I agree, or no, I don't. But my general, and the reason the MSOs, I think, have been able to be successful is they're capital rich, right? They've got money they can throw at, and they just keep putting more money. As to Andrew's point earlier on, I don't know a lot of companies that are making money right now. They might not be losing. Some are losing less money than others. But if you don't have enough capital to keep the thing alive, I was talking to someone who just wanted to get into the space, and they needed a couple $1 million that was going to sit in the bank for at least a couple of years to go through the application process. And they said, well, who's got that kind of money? I'm like, not you. It's like so you have to find someone who does, So I think this makes it hard. So the point's well made about Rhode Island to be competitive. I think there's some different things we can do that'll help make that better. So let me just segue, because we got 10 minutes left here, and I really appreciate all the comments and feedback from everybody. And please feel free to keep this chat going online and elsewhere after this is over. You can reach these folks out on LinkedIn, or you can certainly contact Annette and the hub, and we can get people in touch with everybody. We're glad to do that. So when you look at the federal quote unquote legalization, and let's just say that's one thing that could happen, meaning cannabis becomes legal. And I was at the Payment Banking Compliance Conference down in DC a couple of weeks ago, and there was a gentleman there from Canada, and they control like 70% of the payments in Canada. And they said that, when it became legal in Canada, it was still 4+ years later that the majority of big banks got in the space, because it took them that long to get past the stigma of cannabis and get into compliance plans, and there was still regulatory oversight. So when I look at that space, and I look at the United States, if we pass a legal bill, I don't think, we're much bigger than they are. I think there'll still be that issue we have to work through. But then there's not just that piece, right? There's the Safe Bank Bill, which says, hey, it's okay to put money in the bank. There's also the, hey, it's okay for an insurance company to, insure cannabis dispensaries, and that the cash they're taking from the dispensaries isn't considered money laundering. Because if you're taking money from a federally illicit, enterprise, then any money that you're, washing, so to speak, in your regular cash, you fall into this whole crazy place. So I guess my in terms of that question for this group here, what minimal guidance could Rhode Island DBR give, so that even in the state of Rhode Island, for let's say the banks and the domestic insurers here that are working, that could give them some level of comfort that they can start to support these enterprises, so we're not continuing to operate kind of hamstrung, right? I mean, if you can't get insurance, if you can't deposit monies, and you can't write checks and feel that you're not concerned that all of a sudden they're going to get debanked, which is afraid I'd never heard that phrase until I got into cannabis. Well, what are thoughts on that? And just for reverse order there, Jacob, I'll start with you. Any comments on that before we go around the circle?
first of all, I've never heard a bank that like has had a good kind of reason, like overall, why they haven't been able to kind of invest in cannabis like a traditional business. We worked at a Seaport Bank out of Portland, Maine, which was one of the only banks in Maine, one of the most legacy markets in the country. And I would always describe it was kind of like that scene in Scarface where people would be like coming in with duffel bags full of money and sitting in the lobby with their cash, right, sort of thing. And the banking person would sit there with their hands in their hand and go, "Oh my God, like what are we going to do with this?" Meanwhile, I'm thinking about any other bank in the world. Like these people are delivering cash to your bank on a Friday afternoon on a weekly, bi-weekly basis, right? Sounds pretty good if I'm a banker, right? Like not a bad situation. Now, I don't really think that sort of change is going to happen overnight. And I really think it's probably not going to happen until we start to have a federal legalization sort of product that's out there. Banks have every reason not to back cannabis dollars and be able to fund cannabis dollars. We've gone through that ourselves. A lot of our clients have gone through that ourselves. That's the biggest piece. I think a lot of people talk about the SAFE Act. I think that's kind of something that's not necessarily gaining a lot of momentum, but to be honest with you, it's really hamstrung, the industry growth, right? If you talk about a 20% tax, you talk about not being able to get any legitimate banking. How are we supposed to grow and scale the businesses? We're lucky being a software product, but again, I know a lot of people that are struggling over these basic sort of needs that a traditional business in their first 1 through 3 years would go through. But because it's cannabis, even though it might not even be plant touching, you're still affected and not able to kind of do traditional banking. So probably the biggest darkest secrets of running a cannabis business is like, yeah, guess what? The banks aren't going to work with you. And that's the probably saddest part, I think, of it going right now. So
Yeah. So I'm going to jump in real quick, Jacob, before you jump in, Mikhail. So tier 2, non-plant touching, right? So Mikhail, you are plant touching, right? Because of what the business that you're involved with. I assume your bankers or your insurers would consider you a tier 1 in the work that you do, which means you are touching plants. So how has that affected you as far as banking, and what are your thoughts on that for Rhode Island?
We are not plant touching, specifically from our perspective. I mean, we sell ancillary equipment and hardware that to grow and monitor and allow the cultivation of plants and streamline
So
it.
software, hardware, tier 2, not tier 1. Okay.
Not tier 1, but we were forced out of a federally an international bank, which is where we're doing business, and we bank with Coastway Bank and had to find a local, more welcoming bank to move to for our business, in that space. But as Jacob said, I mean, there's just a lot of, some of the larger banks they're washing cannabis money one way or another, and some of the other businesses that they support, they just choose which ones they do.
That's right. Andrew.
So there are some banking opportunities. They're incredibly expensive. It's going to cost you 4 to 5% a month to move your money around, to have a checking account, deposit, and so on and so forth. One of the really cool things in Rhode Island could be if Rhode Island could work with our state credit unions, so that the state credit unions become a depository of funds in a state regulated market. The credit unions make more money, which is good, and the owners or the business owners have an opportunity to put their money in a bank that's not located 3,000 miles from where we currently sit.
That's helpful. And I'll add one more piece of that to one interesting anecdote. I was at a MG BizCon in Vegas a few years back, and I met a gentleman who said that weekly he went to the IRS office and put his entire all of his income into I said, "You laundered your money through the federal government?" He goes, "Well, I wouldn't call it that." I'm like, "All right, whatever." But he got a treasury check at the end of the year and put it in his bank, and nobody cared. So the other thing I guess I just want to bring up is that I would love to see, and this is just me for the DBR to think about, Matt, for you to comment on this. I was talking to another big state, big body business, and talking to someone for their cannabis commission. And I mentioned the BSA officers, the Bank Secrecy Act officers, and the anti-money laundering AML and KYC, know your customer officers. That there's no standard. They're their own independent czar at every bank, right? They kind of make up their own decision at each bank what they're going to do. And if there was some state regulatory oversight to give them some guidance, that would be helpful. And when I mentioned the BSA officer, and this was a C-level person at one of these cannabis, he goes, "What's a BSA officer?" And I was flabbergasted that was not something that they even knew who that was. So I guess I'm saying, Matt, what could the state do in that regard around banking? Is that on the radar? Is someone talking about that?
Yeah, it is on the radar. I don't think that we're where we ought to be, and certainly where we will be in the coming years. We have actually some very enlightened individuals at Greenwood Credit Union here in Rhode Island, right here in Warwick, actually, that have started not only to act as a sort of depository and lending sort of arm for some of our businesses, many of our businesses, in fact, but also have started to do things like sort of extend construction loans against the value of the sort of secured against the value of the premises itself, which is unique and new in our industry here in this state. And I think a very good thing, to the extent that obviously capital investment in the premises is a key step along the way to growth of a business. So, we also have the advantage here at DVR of also being the regulator of our state chartered banks, credit unions. And so we've got the right people in the mix. We talk about this on a weekly basis at least. And all I can say at this point is we've got sort of the right ingredients in the mix. I don't think, like I said, we're where we need to be in terms of access to capital and access to banking services, but it's obviously a key piece of the puzzle.
Helpful. So we got literally less than 2 minutes. So if I say I'm going to each of you one thing Rhode Island could be best of breed, what could we best at in the country? Give me one thing real quick. This is like speed talk here. Andrew, you're up first.
Grow.
Grow. Okay. Mikhail.
Embrace the legacy growers and enable a market for everyone.
Okay. Jake.
Yeah, I think product.
Okay. And Matt, how about you from a regulatory piece? What could we do better than anybody else?
I hope that we have the most sort of enlightened, reality-based regulatory environment of any state in the country.
Okay, that would be wonderful. We're down that path. Annette, I'm going to look back to you for a moment. I think I got most of the questions that were in there. I'll make sure I didn't miss anybody. And before I do that, I want to thank our panelists here, Andrew, Jacob, Matt, Mikhail. Thank you very, very much.